So now we will test the transactions for return, void, and refund. So on the existing POS screen, okay, the scenario here is for the void for the same day void process. So for this one, the scenario for void must happen on the same day. So it references to the existing point of sale sessions on that day. For example, okay, the cashier can refund the existing point of sale or sorry, avoid transactions within that day. For example, let's sample here this one. Okay, let's sample an existing one. So for the void here, it's okay. Let me sample a previous date so we can have an idea. So for the void, so this void process must not happen. So there must be a restriction for this. So this one proceeds. So this must be okay, this must be restricted to only the existing day. For example, the cashier and manager cannot void the transaction past October 29. Okay, let's go back to the orders and let's see if there's any transactions for the void. Okay, so this one does not proceed. It doesn't have any restriction for the past dated void. Okay, so now I will process a void transaction for the paid transactions here. Okay, so for my example, okay, I will use the existing one on my record here. So I will reference the sale for VAT for this transaction. So for Aldrich John Fernandez, here, we will do a void for these 25 items. Okay, and we will proceed with the payment. So the previous transaction for the void is done on Gcash. So let's select here the Gcash, and the amounts here amount to 28,000 and also the VAT amount. Okay, but here there's no indication for the VAT sales. Okay, this must be negative 25,000, just as referenced on the sales invoice receipt. So the amounts here for the totals for negative per order lines are correct. Total is correct. Okay, Gcash amount is correct, but the VAT sales here is not properly accounted to negative 25,000. Okay, and for the return reference, sorry, for the void reference, it refers to the correct sales invoice number 76, but now it auto increments or uses the next available sales invoice number. So for reference for implementation, we will use the prefix of void 006 plus the reference invoice number. For our example, this must be the reference the sales invoice number on the order list. So for example, okay, the refunded sales invoice number is 76. So it must use the reference invoice number 76 here and add the prefix for this one. Okay, so it will use the 76 for the void And it will add a reference here for the void 0006. Okay, so it will retain its original document number, and the process also restores inventory quantities. Okay, so I will check this later when the post session is closed. Okay, so now I will sample a return order. Okay, so I will sample a return order. Okay, for reference, I will use the existing transaction. For example, this one. Customer is Lawrence PWD. Okay, and I will return part of the items ordered here. So 8 pieces. Okay, so now I will refund or return this item to the inventory. 8 pieces for the palm oil. Let's proceed for the pin code access. Okay. Okay, so we will proceed with the payment. So this one is a negative value. Okay, the used payment method for the BNPC is bank. So we will use bank here. And for comparison for the sales invoice, it correctly references to the amount. Okay, so this one, okay. Mhm. Just to calculate the BNPC discount. Okay, so we will tag it here. So original price, it is 4380. Okay, just to reference, the product is 10 liters. So this one. So the sales price, it is 537.60 when it has VAT. So for calculation, okay, it's 480 times 8. So this one has no VAT value. Okay, let me double check. It's 53760 plus taxes times 8. So the value must be 4380. So the value here must be mirrored on the original sales invoice. So the value here must be negative 43.80, and discounts must have the same value here but in negative. Okay, so this one has no reflection on the return invoice number. So for the returns, we will just account for the discounts and the correct value on the original sales invoice number. And as for the VAT amount, okay, it's 4380 times 0.95. So this one takes account for the VAT sales. Okay, and upon checking for the VAT sales, here it's still accounted as zero. So the VAT amount must be 3648 for the VAT sales, or negative 3648. Okay, As for checking the VAT amount, it's correct here, but it has no negative 3648 on the VAT sales here. So this must be negative. But this is reflected on the return invoice. Okay, so just to summarize, if the invoice is returned, we will reference the original format on the original sales invoice. So negative 43.80 and negative values here for the 5% BNPC. So this one is 21504, and for the VAT sales, it's negative 3648. The VAT amount here is correct. It's negative 47, and total amount due is, okay, not properly counted. Okay, amount due. Okay, so it's 43.80. Okay, for minus 215.04. Okay, so the total amount is correct for 085. And for the other references on the sales invoice, it has the return invoice number. Okay, and again, for the reference return invoice, it must be 78. So this one has references, but this return invoice or refund invoice uses an existing incrementing sales invoice number. So the last invoice number here, it's 81. This is for the void. It must use the existing sales invoice number reference. So the reference here, it's 78. Okay, and for the returns, it has a return invoice number here. Okay, so for clarity, we will use the reference here. For example, return dash 0008, and let's append the original sales invoice number. So for our example, we will use RET here and add the slash sorry dash 00078, which refers to the original sales invoice number. So we will not use 82 or the next incrementing invoice numbers for the purpose of void, returns, and refunds. And if possible, we can use this field here for return invoice number. Same scenario as the void scenarios. Like for example, on the orders, we will have reference invoice number here for void. So it will use the value here. For example, void dash, okay, this one, 0006. And for clarity, we will add or prefix this one with reference to the original sales invoice number and the existing invoice number for that specific transaction. Okay, so we will not use the next incrementing sales invoice number for the purpose of return, void, and refund. So now for the last example, I will use a scenario for a refund. Okay, so for the next transaction, I will use a reference for the six transactions here. Okay, this one is for VAT exempt. And let's also use this for zero rated. Okay, so I will use the method here for doing a refund. Okay, for VAT exempt and zero rated. So the customer here is always on tap. Okay, the reference here is for VAT exempt and sales invoice number is 79. So I'll be refund the full items. Okay, and I will proceed for the payment. So for the reference, for the VAT exempt, customer or the cashier used the bank for the transaction. Okay, so for reference, let's pull up the existing transactions. So here for the values, it must mirror a reference sales invoice. Okay, so for the refund, it references to the next incrementing return invoice number, which is correct. And it references to the old invoice number. But here it uses, for the return invoice number receipt, it uses the next incrementing. So we will not use this 83. And for the values, it must be negative 8,000. And for the BNPC, it must be negative 5,000. For the values here, this must be negative 13,000. Total sales must be negative 13,000. And that amount must stay zero. And lastly, the total amount must be negative 13,000. So on this scenario, the VAT, the VAT amounts are included in the refunded values here. Okay, and for the reference, it must have, again, this must have the return, okay, and the reference on the post order list. So looking back on the post order list, so this one must not use the next incrementing sales invoice number. Okay. Okay, so this one uses the return invoice number. So we will prefix this one on the invoice number plus the original sales invoice number. So we will replace this 83 with this whole invoice number. Okay, and let's sample again for another transaction for refund. This time for zero rated transactions. Okay, so let's move forward to the paid orders. And for reference, I will use a 6 transaction for zero rated for a refund. Customer is Edible Delicious Ventures. So this one, I will process a full refund for the items. Okay, manager pin code. Okay, for the payment. The payment method used here is it's card. So I will use card. And here for the values. For zero rated, it's correct. For VAT exempt. For the VAT inclusive, it includes the VAT again on the computation for negatives. So this must mirror the values on the reference sales invoice number. So it must be negative 8,000. For the VAT exempt, it's working fine. Okay, for the VAT sales, VAT exempt, so This must mirror the original sales invoice. So this must be negative 13,225.00. And it must not have any values from VAT amount and VAT exempt sales. Okay. And for the amount here, sorry, for the footer information, this is correct. This one is tagged as mixed sale. So this has no reference from the existing, sorry, for the original sales invoice. The original sales invoice has zero rated sale. Okay. And for the incrementing sales invoice number, it uses the next available incrementing sales invoice number. So for this scenario, it must use the 10 and reference the old sales invoice number. So, okay, so for this one, refund. Okay, so this one must have zero rated sale, and it uses the next incrementing sales invoice number, and the values for that table must be in reverse. So this one is not mirrored. Okay, and for the values for the total in change, it's not mirrored. So it indicates or adds the VAT from the VAT inclusive item, which on the original invoice has no VAT. So our goal here is to mirror the values from the original sales invoice and also mirror the footer information like for zero rated sale. Okay, and here it must not use the next incrementing sales invoice number. So it will use RET 00010, and we will append here the RET to the reference. So for the invoice number, we will use this string for the information.